Welcome back, everybody. I'm here today with Andrew Peters of Currie Brown. Quick story about Andrew. First of all, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Met Andrew several weeks ago. Interesting story, Power of People, which is part of my show, is meeting people, getting introduced to people, understanding what they do in our industry, and bringing what they do to them.
Yep.
So Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll take it from there.
Going all the way back, as you can tell from the accent, born and raised in New Jersey. So originally from the UK. So I was in the UK, trained as a quantity surveyor, which isn't something you actually train for in this country. Typically, people go around the construction management route. Mm-hmm. So I actually did a degree in quantity surveying in the UK. I always jokingly say, tongue-in-cheek, the great thing about quantity surveying is you're never going to earn the money of a hedge fund guy, but you can literally put a pin in a map and go get a visa to move there. So
that's pretty cool.
And that's how
good way to get to the US.
Absolutely. So I actually ended up leaving the UK, moving to Australia, working over there for a number of years. And then I left, obviously I left Australia.
Always in the construction field.
Always in the construction field. Always on the consultant side as well.
Similar to us.
Yep, absolutely. Ironically enough, it wasn't by design in any way, shape or form. All the men in my family happened to be in construction. And all the women seem to have something to do with childcare in some way. Teachers, nursery teachers, those types of things.
On the social side.
Yeah, but all the men just randomly that were in construction were all on the GC side.
Wow.
So I'm the outlier. So I like to say I'm the Skywalker to their Vader. You know?
Yeah. So you took the opposite end of it.
Yeah. So and then I moved to New York in 2004, which I'm touching 19 years
Wow, good for you.
in New York now. You know, hence the accent, though.
Yeah, I could tell. It's really changed a lot.
So I've been doing this for a number of years. Obviously, Currie Brown. So we put a flag in the map. Currie Brown's been in the US for over 30 years. I think it's actually up at 30, almost touching 40 years now. And whilst they've had a good footprint, and I can tell you a little bit more about our services and the sectors that we work in. So we work in quite a vast, diverse bunch of sectors, but we never truly had an actual flag in the map in New York. We always said we serviced New York, but it was from New Jersey, and you know as well as I do.
That imaginary line that acts as a river changes the dynamics tremendously.
Absolutely. I mean, you could be sitting in Hoboken and you're still not in New York. Right.
You're looking right at it.
Exactly. So we put a flag in the map. I opened up the New York office, and we just started to grow and expand the business from there. And obviously, attending networking events and meeting people such as yourself to connect with and start to understand what else is going on in the market and what's happening.
So tell me what you actually do at Currie Brown.
Oh, this could get me in trouble.
besides networking, but it's we always talk about the power of people. Yep. We got introduced at a networking thing, and we just hit it off. It was a great conversation. We met again. We went out to dinner. We talked again, and we realized that although we never knew each other, we knew each other.
Yeah,
and that's the beauty of this business in New York City.
Yep.
Which is we have mutual clients, and what you do actually has a big impact on what we do, which is cost estimating of projects. So that's how our conversation started. So, Andrew, what do you do? And I'd like you to repeat that because it was very, very informative and intriguing to me about what your role is in the process of clients choosing to build projects and not build projects. Because I guess that's the easiest way to kind of say, what's your role?
Yep. So Currie Brown, holistically, we are a project management and cost management firm. So we have a whole suite of services, project management, program management, quantity surveying, cost management, audit work, condition assessment work. I myself, being a quantity surveyor and being in New York, so although I run the New York office and I run the New York operation, I also oversee the higher education and commercial real estate, CRE, sectors nationally. But I very much like to get involved in projects. And this is how our conversation originally started.
Correct.
So I like to roll my sleeves up. I think the real power that we bring, and just do quantity surveyors generally and cost estimators generally, particularly on the independent side, is we help you set your budget, your project up for success from the very, very, very beginning. Now, we can coming at any point during the project. Sometimes we're actually coming at the end of a project when it's
Right.
when it's distressed.
Right.
A little bit too late at that
Sometimes
point.
it's too late, right?
Yeah, but still fun projects to get involved in. But typically what happens for us is we want to get involved as early as possible.
Right.
If possible, we want to work for the actual owner. Sometimes we'll work for the architects and the engineers. What we really want to do is work for the owner. And the analogy I think I actually gave to you when we were chatting a lot, and I was very cognizant that neither of us come up for air very often.
No, and that's why you're here.
This is going to be like the 15 series podcast.
Yeah, it's okay.
So I think particularly in the world of higher education, but even commercial as well, but institutions such as higher education, even hospitals as well, like national institutions, despite being very localized, they talk, they network, they chat.
Correct.
And the biggest fear we always have is when someone wants to do something, at some point, a budget has to be set.
Correct.
And how do you set that budget?
Right. And for us, a lot of times clients will come to us and say, hey, we're thinking about expanding our library. And we say, okay. And the architect comes to us or the owner comes to us and says, well, from a code standpoint, do we need to put in a sprinkler? Do we need to put in a fire alarm? Because if we have to upgrade those two, parts of the building, that could cost us several million, and that puts us over the budget.
Yep.
So the best way for me to understand what you do is before it even gets to us, an institution may come to you and say, look, we want to do 2 labs and we're going to do 2 full floors, and we did some internal work and we think we could build them for 600. And Andrew sits at the table and he rolls his eyes and he goes, oh my God, the last 10 labs we did, they're 1,200 a square foot.
You want a job?
Well, because we hear it as the code consultant. How do we value engineer it? Okay, well, we could maybe value engineer certain things and find a loophole maybe in the code that says you don't have to do this. But we also tell the client, because we are pro-safety, pro-law, that, hey, you may get away with it this time, but next time so if you raise the funds now, upgrade your fire alarm now. Don't just put a Band-Aid on it.
Yep.
So one of the things that I've had even in my own personal experience is building a home up in Sullivan County. I thought I knew how to do a budget. and I've built before. We've built buildings before. We've renovated buildings. And I went to a friend of mine who was a GC, and he gave me his fancy list, and we went through it. And when we were done, he said, okay, now add 30% for all your mistakes. I go, 30%? That's like another $150,000. He goes, absolutely. He goes, and you may need more. And I was like, is that how you do estimating? He goes, well, to be honest with you, Sisto, it all depends. It all depends on what point you are going to do the estimating.
Yep.
Do you have full plans? Do you have just a concept?
Is it an idea even?
Right.
It might not even be it might literally be a discussion of an idea it could even be as wild as, hey, I found that site is going to be sold. It's got a 4-story building on it, and we know that it's not maxed out on the FAR,
right.
And we could actually go and put something else in there.
Right.
And you're literally looking at that and you're saying, well, what would the budget be for that? So we can even figure out, A, what would we build?
Correct.
What would the budget be for that? And then
Correct.
How does that budget then feed into what we might want to pay for that building and what's it worth?
And that's exactly similar to what we do. Developers come to us and they say, hey, look, we're looking at this site. They don't tell us what they're paying for it, but we kind of know it's $200 a square foot for FAR. It could be $150. It could be $500 in Manhattan. I have no idea. But at the end of the day, the basic question is, what can I build? So if you go back to last week's episode was Richard Lobel. What makes New York City great is you can go to a book, you can open it up, and you get an as-of-right building. 90% of everything that's built in New York City is as of right. So you know what you can build right up front.
Yeah.
You don't need to go to a board. You don't have to go back to New Jersey and sit in front of a zoning board and ask them, can I put this in? You go to a book and you have that. So the $1 million question.
How do you figure it out?
Well, besides how you figure it out, the one question that we get asked all the time, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in length a little bit, is, so Andrew, you're here to tell me, is construction going up or down? Because that's the question that seems to be the conversation as we go from networking group to networking group, meeting with other developers. And and all you hear is, oh my God, everything's so expensive. Labor's crazy. There's no labor. There's no materials. Materials are through the roof. But yet, there's indicators, nationally, that prices are actually stabilized and might be coming down because of the demand, because there's not as much work. So, I think that that's really something that I would like for you to spend a few minutes to give us how you use the national numbers, how you use the local numbers, and then how you advise your clients that, hey, look, you should be prepared that there's going to be an escalation cost, or, by the way, we've seen the numbers start to come down. So if you could spend a few minutes on that.
So the great thing about this subject is that people are always really careful and cautious about how they put themselves out on this discussion, because no one wants to be wrong.
Right.
But the great thing about this discussion is it changes organically so quickly that by the end of this conversation, I could be wrong.
It could change, right?
So,
and that's okay.
And then when you call me back to say, oh, that was a mistake, I could be right by then again. So it's amazing, right?
Well, and that's the beauty of having a podcast, because what we're doing would be no different than you and I sitting at a bar, having a drink and having a chat about construction costs. And if we were having that conversation, you would be honest at that moment about what you feel. So at the moment that we film this episode, right, what do you feel? And what are the numbers telling you today? Because tomorrow you could be way off.
So the great thing about, and I often talk about this, particularly with clients as well, when we talk about escalation, just ring fence and escalation for a second, and then we can jump right into it. Escalation is a really interesting one, because what you're essentially doing is you're leveraging where you think the costs are going to go. Right. So
you're hedging it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the rule of thumb is that you escalate to the midpoint of construction. The idea being that when you've actually got your bid as a CM or as a GC, they don't need to buy all those trades at once. They can, they're going to buy the trades later on, and they're going to try and hedge where those trades are going to go to.
Is that trade on the way down? Is concrete going up? Well, I got to get in the ground first. You're not going to wait till the end.
Exactly.
But you may buy your foundation, but not your superstructure.
Exactly. And you have early works packages. So the reason it gets kind of interesting is because I'm going to tell you why it's difficult and why we can't do it, and then I'm going to tell you why we can do it and how we do it. Right?
I love it.
I told you, we never get a word in edgeways. So very often when you talk escalation, everybody talks about what happened.
Past.
Right? Yeah. Everyone talks about the past. Oh, well, we've seen this. This is an indicator. We've seen that. That's an indicator. And I liken it to driving a car by looking in your rearview mirror. You go in that direction, but you're constantly talking about what was behind you. And that's what happens in the discussion of escalation.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that analogy, because it's kind of true, because you're definitely running towards that wall, but you're all looking in the rearview mirror being like, well, that happened. We should be right up there. And to a certain extent, you can use that as an indicator, but you do.
But it's just a part of it.
It's just a part of it. You've actually got to take a broader look at what is actually happening. You're reconciling bids. You're looking. There's so many different facets and factors that add into it. The actual economy itself. Different sectors firing at different times. What the government's doing. Are they throwing more money into infrastructure? Are they sucking work over there? Data centers at the moment going absolutely crazy. We've just got so much work going on in data centers nationally at the moment. They're causing real problems for the supply chain issue with regards to major pieces of equipment.
Right.
And that is now sucking it from other sectors.
Places. Right.
So that starts to cause that
the
problem
warehousing business, the distribution centers have been getting built all over the place. The Amazons of the world. So.
And I've always, and I'm going to go out a little bit on a limb here, because I always find it quite interesting, particularly when you talk about escalation. There's been periods in the past. So let's talk about the past. So like when we had a major jump before, if you look at the very beginning of the 2000s, it was running very low. It was around like 2%. At one point, it was like 0.5%. And then in 06 and 07, we had escalation jump in New York. It went 10, it went 12, 2 years back on back. And everybody...
Now, was that because of supply and demand, that they were building more?
It was, at the time, it was just a lot of a boom. And so my, and this is going out on a limb a little bit here, but I've always used the residential market as an indicator.
Oh, really?
Of what is going to happen to the rest of construction.
So your position and your opinion is it all starts with the residential market.
That's the first flag. That's the first flare
flag.
that goes up.
So when that starts to dive down, that's when we know.
Yeah, and you see it trickle in trades. So for example, when interest rates are low, demand is higher.
Correct.
Then you need to get in early, build it, and you've got to catch it before the costs start to go. So the trades you start to see instantly, you start to see foundation, earthworks, and you start to see concrete. Still somewhat, but residential is very often built concrete.
It's all concrete.
It's flat plate going up. So when we saw that in 06 and 07 as well, we did at the time, and I remember because I was looking at the construction costs. At one point, we were buying concrete like 4 years earlier, flat plate, at like 55, 65 bucks a square foot. And over the next 4 or 5 years, I mean, I delivered a project in 09, I think it was, and we bought it in 08, and flat plate, and it was for a hotel. So again, similar to residential, we paid 105 bucks a square foot for it. So, and you can use it, and then that starts to put escalation and inflation across
and it runs it across all the other buildings.
And they all start to suck up, and it starts to take that. When you see the interest rates go up and you see a slowdown in escalation, see a slowdown in residential, you then start to see that kind of trickle back through, and there's a little bit of a lull generally. And then what often happens
That's a very interesting concept.
And what often happens, I find as well, is you then, so if the economy really drops, right, then you start to find there's big government infrastructure plans and spending. Then they try and come in to suck it up.
Start doing the roads and doing all that.
But that's slow because governments
takes forever.
They take forever, whereas developers, particularly residential, get in, get out.
Well, just like right now, that boom, the boom of the office to residential conversion. So, Lou Madigan came in, right? Who's a good friend, and we talked about this office to residential conversion. And he had a very interesting point that I have, over the last several weeks, I've gone out to confirm his point. And it was incredibly interesting that I think that you could be a subject matter expert to confirm his thinking. Okay. His thinking was that when you build a new building, your biggest problem when you're building the new building is when you're in the hole, when you're digging the hole. Yep. That's where all the problems are. What am I going to hit? I'm going to spend $50 million to drive down to hold it up, and I'm going to spend $50 million to keep it from falling over.
Yep.
So he goes, and then you got all the adjoining property owners. You got a tunnel. You got this. You got that. You got monitoring. You got cracks. You got this. You got that. He goes, but then once you get out of the hole, you're pretty much on cruise control because that's where your biggest area of contingency is because you don't know what you're going to find. And he said that on the office to residential conversion, he said, there's no hole. We got a building. He goes, so we believe that even throwing in contingencies of when we open it up and we find things that were unexpected, these, because office to residential is going to be steel, right? So that's a big, but there's pros to that. They got 10-foot too high ceilings. They got windows. One of the events that I went to, and I believe you were with me that night, is that the gentleman talked about a different way of living in New York City. Yep. We're not in an 8'2" ceiling anymore. We're in a 10'2" ceiling. Yep. It's bigger. It's grander. Well, again, leaving affordable housing out because these won't be for affordable housing. They're going to be, very expensive apartments and beautiful. But his point was that their analysis was that they can save $40 a square foot. Their building is 80,000 square feet. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Yeah. However, the part that I loved about Lou was that he said it like it is. That's our guess. Unless we go in and we do it and we understand where we're going to lose money and where we're going to lose money, it is strictly an estimate and a guess. So the way that you do it is you don't go out and pound your chest and say, we're going to make $40 a square foot. Lou's saying, no, we're going to build this, hope we don't lose anything, and use it as almost as a thesis of if we do one and we see this is working out well, we jump into the next one and we jump into the next one. So in your opinion and your experience, because this is the wave right now, without a 421A, there's no affordable housing.
Yep.
There's no sites with the condo market being so, it's still strong for the upper echelon, but it's not as strong for, other areas. Yep. So no one's really building condos either right now. No. So the market is going to be this office to residential conversion. So at the end of the day, is it going to be cost effective? Regardless, it won't provide the affordable housing. Is it going to be able to work?
You can. This is a difficult. It's a double-edged sword, right? He's right. It is untested. Can it work? Absolutely. Will we have to change the parameters and the expectations of what we thought compared to our previous models?
Of course.
Absolutely. So it really comes down to a question of what's the resistance as when we start to change those parameters and how do we. But he is right. A lot of the risk is mitigated, but then you're also working with the risk of I'm trying to do a conversion, just sound transmission, those types of noises. You haven't got the mass about it as well.
My concept always was when you do an office building, you gotta demo the building from the middle out. Which is
exactly,
right? Okay, so you take the top floor, you throw it to the floor, and you take it out the front of the building. You take them, and you keep, and then you gotta keep this thing together. You gotta keep it structurally fit. Then you open up the steel. Then you're gonna put a new skin. So you're really taking, I think of it as a car guy. I'm taking. As long as the frame is good, we can do anything else. We can make the body look good. We could change the motor. We could change. Same thing here with today's, and I say technology, one of the things they talked about is the new HVAC units and exhausting. It's much more feasible. It's easier. It's not as difficult as it was in the past. But again, you're still putting a skin on an old structure. You're talking, a 1950, 1960 building that is right now a Class C or D office building that has no value, because it's vacant.
What's behind the walls?
Right.
What's in the shafts? Have you got what remediation issues have you got in there?
What tenants were in the building?
Yep. What facade have you got on it at the moment?
Right.
So then you start to go, well, if I'm now, is the core in the right place? Probably not.
Probably not.
And it's the wrong size.
Right.
And you haven't got the right number of it.
Right. But loose position was, and I don't want to speak the way he explained it, which was interesting, is regardless of
all of those things,
things, the foundation is there.
Yes.
The skin is coming off anyway.
Yep.
The elevator shafts are going to have to get upgraded anyway because they're commercial elevators, not residential areas. So they don't have trench drains in the front. They don't have the right, size for the stretches. So regardless, but at the end of the day, he's saying that the foundation and the time to be in it, you've
saved that.
You're going to save that. Now, again, your demo phase may take as long as putting in a foundation, but again, there was probably a building there before. You're not going to buy a site in Midtown Manhattan without a building on it. Now you got to take a big building down to start all over. So the question, two things that I heard today at the Zoning Advisory Council. Casimir from the New York City Department of Buildings made a very interesting point that the building department understands now that a developer, every day that they have a site open, it costs them money. Lots and lots and lots of money.
Huge.
So red tape is a problem for developers, right? They can't get their TCOs, they can't get their permits, they can't get amendments through the building department. So every day that it goes on. So same concept is here. If you can get into this site and you can build it in a shorter duration and still turn over 150, 200 units.
And stage that as well.
And stage it as well. You're now starting to talk about, feeding the economy, feeding, the disappointing part for me personally, Andrew, that I'm a proponent of it, but I'd like to see changes. And I spoke to Richard Lobel on the last episode about it, which is an incentive for them to put affordable into these units also. Because I think that if you're just going to build these high-end apartments in Midtown Manhattan, are we really fixing the housing crisis? We're not.
No, we're not.
So I think that in the near future, I think we're going to start to see legislate that talk about that, so that when they get this office building back, it's not just going to be condominiums or luxury rentals. That there's going to be a portion of it.
There'll be a component in there.
A component like a 421A where it's $25.75 or whatever. But so in terms of price per square foot, 2022, 2020. I don't want to know numbers. I just want to know, are we in the same place roughly as a guesstimate for the first quarter of 2023 versus 2022?
I'm seeing it tighten up. Okay, so last year, as we came through, even through Q3 of last year, and people were starting to look at their projects for this year, there was discussions around of 12% escalation this year.
Wow.
Right, 12, 10, these kind of numbers were bandied around.
So if inflation's 5-6%, you're talking double.
Yeah. Okay. At the time, I was thinking, I had more of a feeling myself, and again, it is catching lightning in a jar, right? And I had a feeling that it was going to be more like an 8 or a 9 as we moved in. But we're constantly looking at that and seeing what happens. And as we've moved in, so we've now just finished the first quarter,
right?
And we're now starting to say, okay, what actually happened within there? And we didn't see the escalation that we thought we were going to see.
Wow.
Okay.
So that's pretty positive.
And I've had a chat around the industry as well. I don't want to name names, but I do reach out to other individuals as well from the major companies just to have a chat. It's always interesting to see if they have different opinions for the sectors they work in. And
that's the beauty of knowing people.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I'm happy to say it's consistent. So there were blips. Don't get me wrong. There was blips trending higher. Electrical and mechanical trending higher. It hasn't dropped, but it's not shooting up. Right, but that's staying. The best way I could describe the general feeling at the moment is the market feels a little flat, right? And that's how we think 23 is going to go. It's
correct.
more
And
focused on the 24.
We sense that also because we're busy with projects that we had before. We do have some nice projects that we just brought in, like the one that we talked about in Manhattan. But the amount of volume for the future work is much less.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of that I'm seeing, especially for higher education, because that's a big part of what we do, is budgetary. Because during the COVID crisis, they were scrambling just to keep the students, enrolled.
Yep.
Keeping the universities going. And now they're starting to think of, okay, well, I hate to use this word, but we're back to something.
Yes.
I don't like to use the word normal because that's subjective.
The new normal. Do we have to say that?
Right. So we are seeing smaller projects coming out, not big, massive projects, but we're starting to. We need to renovate this slab. We need to fix our gym. We need to do a facade. We need to do this. Yep. Well, that's a really big backbone of our city. It's not just looking at, we're going to do this huge job on the west side, like Hudson Yards. Yes, that's important. But the fabric of New York City is about all the little jobs that keeps all of us working.
Keep it all ticking and flowing and moving.
Exactly, because if it was only about the big jobs, then, then we'd really be we'd be in trouble. Yeah. So your feeling is that do you feel that it's because of demand that the prices have leveled out a little bit, or we not seeing the uptick? But if we were in a boom and they couldn't get material and they couldn't get labor, then it would just escalate more? Is that kind of a ratio?
It would. I mean, what we're seeing at the moment is we've still got supply chain issues on certain things.
Right, certain
products. Generally, we haven't got the boats off the coast of LA. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
They're not all sitting out there on the news every single night. There's blips. So a few months back, there was a blip, and we was actually reconciling a number of estimates, and office storefronts just overnight went crazy.
Yeah.
And they went up. And then I spoke to someone that's like, they've gone up like by 10%. On another bid I had, we had to have some interior glass that was fireproof.
Glass and aluminum.
And fire. And the doors, glass doors just went absolutely. We're starting to see that normalize again. But what happens is people look for indicators. So it's like, oh my God, it's all going up. It's like, no, take a breath.
That one piece.
That one piece in there. And we've seen it level out, but we've seen a lot of other trades that have actually started to come in a lot tighter. And what is interesting, not to say there's a surplus of money by any means, but projects that were budgeted last year in the middle of the year last year, where we were thinking, damn, it could be 10% escalation next year. And we're seeing it flatten out a little bit.
That's great news.
So there is that gap in there where you can actually go, okay, there is opportunity in here.
I'd hate to have your job. When you're right, you're a movie star. When you're wrong, you're a thug.
So I'm gonna go off topic for a second here, but I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I always jokingly say, so whenever you go to an awards show, any sort of award show, be it the AA Awards, anything like that, and someone's won a project award, typically you see everyone get up there. I mean, you've got the architect, the client, every engineer, the acoustician, you've got the code guy up there, you've got the project manager up there, you've got the FF&E person, you've got the person that did the piece of artwork, you've got the doorman standing up there. Do you know who's never there?
Is the
cost estimator. The cost estimator is never there. Now, the only time you ever hear about an estimator is when they've messed something up.
Right.
So I like to say, if you've never heard of me,
That's
it must
a good
be amazing.
Thing. Yeah. And it's funny, to go off point, you know, I started in this business 36 years ago, and we worked for all major general contractors. And there was always a common denominator that a new project would start off, and the whole team, there would be, you know, the owner of the construction company, the exec, the project manager, the project engineer, and there'd be 7 people. And you could look around and everybody's smiling. And you'd look to the end, and there's that poor guy at the end of the table. He's sweating. His tie is all open. And he's like, you could tell he was the estimator.
Yep,
you didn't even have to go up to him and ask him the question. You're like, oh my God, that poor man's under an enormous amount of, or poor person is under an enormous amount of stress. And to this day, even now, when I go visit, you know, my colleagues at GC's office, I always ask, where's the estimator? You look, his office got all kinds of stuff, and the poor man is stressed. There's a board, there's a million things going on. He's trying to grab all this stuff, and it sounds as though you make it sound that you feel that your role in the whole thing isn't important, but you are, and your firm is really the commencement of ideas.
Yes.
Because I could say, I'd love to build a studio at Design. Yeah, and I'd say, and Andrew come and say, hey, Andrew, I want to do this low budget. You think I could do it for $1,000? He'd say, no, you're crazy. Yeah. And I'd say, okay, well then what's the budget? What can we do? Right. And so I think that a lot of times, a lot of projects get into trouble because they don't forecast. They assume certain positions, and that's why we have the issues that we have. But staying on point, which is what we do together, education is a big part of our business. We do private schools, we do public schools, we do charter schools, we do a lot of universities, you know, NYU, Manhattan College, St. John's, Pratt, you name them all. We do something there. And to us, they have always been a very stable place to continue to change, to continue to create these places for young adults to go and have a great place to do their studies, for the environment, having plazas, having outdoor seating, being able to interact in New York City. Where do you see the costs in education? Have they gone, you know, I know that a big part of it is the life sciences, where we're doing labs and we're doing tech. You know, that stuff costs a lot of money to build.
It does. So what is really particularly interesting in the world of higher ed, the reason I love working in higher ed as well, is every other sector stays within its lane. What I mean by that, so if you're into corporate interiors, well, it's corporate interiors. It might be a different bank or a different lawyer.
Right, but it's all the same stuff.
But then when you actually say higher education, so, well, what do you mean by that? And most people would think like, oh, it's a classroom. I can't remember doing classrooms. I don't is anyone doing classrooms anymore?
No.
But what you are doing, you're doing labs, you're doing dorms, you're doing well-being spaces.
Right, yeah, that's a new one.
You're doing admin spaces, but you're doing very special. You're doing a dance studio, you're doing a music practice room, you're doing broadcast studios. And then you start to look at the stock that they have. So then you start to see things like, well, actually they're doing some out-the-ground buildings. Actually, no, it's a conversion of an existing building. Actually, it's a brownstone, and we have to hold up the whole building, but we want to open the door and you step in, and now you are stepping into a classroom or a lab.
Right.
And they're incredibly sexy projects, which sounds like a really nerdy thing to say.
But it is.
But they're fun. They're fun
but
projects to work on.
in the end, flattened out?
So when I say flattened out, so just to clarify that, right? So we were thinking it was going to go that high. I think my opinion at the moment is I think the year is going to end up Escalation is still going to be there.
Right.
It's going to
But it's not
run.
going to be as high as you
No,
projected.
I'm going to go out and throw a marker out there, and I'm just going to say it's going to run between 4 and 5% this
Perfect.
year. That's
What a great way to end an awesome episode. Andrew, I can't thank you enough for coming in. It's been incredibly educational. I love your character. I love your personality. Incredibly informative. So you heard it from you. If he's right or wrong, he is an estimator. 4 or 5% by the end of the year. We hope that's true. We hope that New York City continues to grow. And thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.